Hey there, and welcome back to another Percy Jackson Season 2 review. Today we'll be diving into the latest episode to drop, Episode 5, We Check In To C.C, Siren Resort. This follows up from the previous episode where Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson join Clarice on her quest, and they accidentally blow the ship up in the best action sequence we've seen in the entire show. Coming into this episode, I was very excited. In the book, this particular chapter is so vivid in my mind, and I think after last season, you'd be forgiven for thinking a storyline like this would be heavily altered or cut altogether. It was peak silliness in the books, and that was something that Season 1 really leaned away from. Once we saw Grover in the wedding dress, though, you could pretty much be assured that this storyline was going to happen. I'll just preface before we get started, for people who haven't read the books, there's a significant chance I'll spoil future plot details, so if that's something you care about, this review will not be for you. Likewise, if you haven't seen the episode yet, this review is going to be full of spoilers, so venture forth at your own risk. With all that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? The episode begins with Percy waking up in a steamed room all on his own. Knowing what we do know about this place and how it's a spa, why on earth would the staff just place him and Annabeth on these marble countertops whilst they're unconscious? If heroes come in all the time, then surely they'd have a separate room with comfortable beds for them to lay on and recover in instead of laying injured demigods on these hard surfaces. It's like they just found this random room normally used for sauna type relaxation and stuffed them in there as opposed to a designated recovery area. This place has been running for a long time, so why would you still be acting as if it's some sort of startup business? If you want them to stay, maybe treat them properly. That might be a good start. Initially, Percy thinks he's alone until Annabeth walks through a second door, stopping him from walking through the main one because they don't know what's out there. Immediately, Percy's relieved knowing Annabeth's alive, but I do love that they're playing into the romance still with these small moments. It makes the story more compelling and gives you just enough for the people that are awaiting that part of the story, while still keeping the development slow. It also just makes sense from a narrative perspective. If these two people are together for so long and you know that they're going to be in a relationship in the future, you want to build up those sweet moments. I'm just happy they're developing it this early and it's very cute to see. I also like that they show their natural reactions to ending up in a strange environment. Percy's just ready to immediately walk out the door and investigate before really thinking about what the intentions are of somebody keeping them in this strange room. Meanwhile, Annabeth's taking a look in every nook and crevice to find any sort of hint as to where they could be before venturing forth. Both ideas are quite funny as, either way, they're screwed. Percy going ahead could be a terrible idea as they don't know who's taken him or if there are monsters lurking outside those doors waiting to gobble them up. On the flip side though, if people have specifically taken them and put them in a room for nefarious purposes, I doubt there'd be some way to escape, so searching everywhere like Annabeth would be is a fruitless endeavour. It does show their personalities well though, which I liked. Next up, we get another hint that not all is well. A concierge woman in traditional Greek dress comes in and when Percy draws his sword in defense, her reaction is, you need more time. More time for what? For them to calm down? How on earth is this supposed to happen in this steamed, empty room? They have no information of how they got there, yet they're supposed to be calm? She should already know this. Big red flag in my opinion, but I do like it. This episode very cleverly gives you all the little hints that not all is right with this place without actually saying it explicitly until it's too late. When they start asking questions, she gives them the news that they were found on their own, so it seems like they were the only survivors. You do wonder about this, don't you? It's certainly possible they were found on a raft, but why would some random fisherman bring them here? Why would a fisherman even know of this random island resort? This of course doesn't get addressed in the episode and could be nothing, but it is interesting to me that they were so conveniently found. From memory, didn't they just wash up on the shore of the resort and Percy walks right in? It's possible they just changed how they were found so it didn't feel too samey with Clarice washing up on a separate shore later in the episode, but part of me wonders if this was orchestrated by some god for them to be able to recover and get back on their quest. If that was the case though, you'd think Poseidon could just carry them through the water conveniently to Polyphemus' island, right? Maybe he thought they needed some TLC first, I don't know. Anyway, Percy's immediately crushed at the thought of failing Tyson, and Annabeth tries to comfort him to no avail. I thought this scene was pretty interesting as it's obvious that Annabeth isn't used to Percy losing hope like this. It's almost like she blocks it out as she redirects herself to do something useful. It's sad because obviously you want Percy to have hope and for Annabeth to not leave him at a sensitive time like this, but again, it's playing into their personality types and them growing as people, which I did really like. The writing has genuinely been such a standout in that regard. There's such emotional depth to the show that is really only inferred in the books. Of course, they have the luxury of knowing where the story's going and therefore can highlight or signal where future development of story's heading, but it's just done so well to me that it needs to be praised. So Annabeth exits the room and Percy immediately follows. They enter a hallway filled with people in bathrobes and the vibe is immediately relaxed and peaceful. You'd be forgiven for thinking you died and ended up at some version of heaven. I also couldn't help but laugh at the idea that they have all these people staring at them as though they're not supposed to be there. Surely if heroes are coming in all the time, they'd realize these are just the new ones. The concierge from before Hiller introduces the spa as C.C Spa and Resort, telling them it's the only sanctuary in the Sea of Monsters, that this is a place for heroes to rest and recuperate to get back on their quests. As she's doing this, we get what seems to be a Greek soldier charging out of C.C.'s office, ready to get back on his quest. And this really intrigues me. He's kitted out in traditional clothing that you wouldn't see a Greek soldier wearing in present day. Yet it doesn't seem as though this place acts like the Lotus Casino where they're unaware of time passing them by, so why does he look like this? Do you think he was transformed into an animal centuries ago and C.C purposely released him to ensure that Percy and Annabeth know the risks of trying to leave on their own? That's my personal theory, because otherwise, it makes no real sense. Maybe there's some other ancient Greek camp or something that dresses them like this. I have no idea. So everyone of course wants to watch and see whether he gets past the sirens. They even have a viewing platform with binoculars. Feels very gladiatorial, doesn't it? As Annabeth and Percy follow the others, they're introduced personally to C.C. empathy, and her vibe is so on point. She gives off the energy that one of your mum's friends does when she's super into aromatherapy and chakras, with a dose of that condescending therapy speak while simultaneously being so obtuse as to their own flaws. The costuming just makes it as well, the flowy, overly patterned dress with bare feet. If Byron Bay was a person, this would be it. When they started watching Stavros, I have to tell you, I couldn't stop laughing. Watching this ancient Greek soldier veering off into the sea of monsters on what looks to be a water segue is just so ridiculous to me. I also enjoyed the little hints as well when you get the wide shot on the island. You see that huge pirate ship that's docked there, which alludes to Blackbeard and his crew that we see later. I think there's also a submarine on the other end as well. It just adds to the undercurrent of something not being quite right. Now, obviously, this guy was never going to make it because we had to see how deadly the sirens are firsthand. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't expecting this scene. I actually found it pretty dark, all things considered. When they end the scene with them chewing on him and the blood on the helmet, yikes! I did like it though. It makes me feel really great about the show as they're not afraid to show the true stakes and horror that demigods face. Within the books, you're constantly told how dangerous it is to be a demigod. However, it never really feels like the threat is real. Of course, some demigods do die in this story, but those instances are really rare and often because of a specific war plot. So to see one die doing something that our heroes have to inevitably face makes consequences seem very, very real. Just another example of really great writing. Annabeth and Percy start asking questions of C.C. about how to get past the sirens. She tells them that their fatal flaw is used against them when it comes to the sirens, and so they have to do the emotional work to be able to escape. Of course, Annabeth hasn't got time for introspective therapy, and she comes up with a solution. Once again from the Odyssey, where they could use beeswax to plug their ears so they can't hear the siren song. I do love the conversation here where C.C. remarks that they're Homer fans. It makes it seem like the myth is some TV show or fandom that they're a part of, instead of a real-life blueprint that they could rely on and follow. Even though we later learn she's been hiding a jar of the wax in her desk, she is right. Annabeth's plan to rely on what Odysseus did before didn't work for them. Yes, he succeeded in the Sea of Monsters and that's useful, but just copy and pasting what he did can't work for them because they're different to him. Their circumstances aren't the same. Cece's right once again when she says that she's excessively reliant on knowledge. It works well when you need information about what's coming up ahead, but can very well work against you if you try to apply it in a real-world scenario. It's not inherently wise because it's not taking into account all these different factors. Once again, just great writing and character development because Annabeth will learn this lesson that she's more than just a history audiobook and can actually develop clever plans with the information she already has. She doesn't need to rely on other people's plans and can come up with clever ideas on her own. I imagine it's pretty difficult being a demigod where you just have the ability to absorb knowledge next to the other that can literally control water and use that to his physical advantage. I'm sure it would make you feel more vulnerable and insecure, especially in the real world with loads of monsters trying to kill you. Moving away from CC's for the moment, we come to another shore where, surprise, Clarice is still alive. Before we get into the main plot, I do have a little nitpick here. First of all, her hair, where it's all frizzy and how her face is half covered in sand, fantastic, great styling. However, the fact that her clothes are bone dry, including her jacket and boots, it just makes zero sense to me. Anyone that's had clothes soaked, which they were because she literally washed up on shore, would know it takes ages for them to dry. Sure, you could theoretically explain it away by saying the Sea of Monsters is technically within the tropics, so maybe got really hot and dried her clothes, but look around. It doesn't look that way. Honestly, none of the shores they've ended up on look like you'd expect for being in that particular geographical location. I suppose you could explain it away and say that magically it looks more like Greece because of the monsters and god influence, but still, it's not like Greece is that cold in the summer where this is supposed to be set. They're all dressed in jackets and long pants. I can't even accept the explanation that it's been a long time because Grover is still alive. He's got a specific timer on him in regards to the wedding day, and so if that's come to pass, then sure, maybe her clothes would be dry. I doubt it though when she's that compacted on the sand. The only explanation I could accept is that Poseidon was feeling generous and dried her clothes for her when she washed ashore. However, in the show, he's never even done that for his own son, so why would he do this for a child of Ares? Plus, she had water ingested, so it feels a bit low priority if that's what he chose to do. It doesn't make sense, and it bothers me. Anyway, Clarice very quickly realizes she's washed ashore onto Polyphemus' island, which is insanely lucky. She can even see the fleece. So she walks right towards it and immediately gets caught in the most mundane trap imaginable. I wonder if Polyphemus only set one trap or if there were loads just in case she missed it. I'm also beginning to question where the hell he was hiding because he appears pretty quickly, and he's huge. There only seems to be small bushes and thin trees between the shore and the fleece. Maybe there was a huge rock just out of shot that he was hiding behind, I don't know. He ominously approaches, and I have to mention, I really love his theme music. The score across the season so far has been really good, and it definitely feels as though the show's developing its sound and vibe a lot better. It's so deep and scary, and you're really afraid of what he's going to do to Clarice. He drops into Grover's cave, and can I just say I love the introduction of Grover in this scene? Him humming the consensus song as he sews his veil is too funny to me. I hope they keep this bit up. I want to see him in season 5 getting ready for the war against Kronos, still humming that consensus song. Honestly, a lot of the scene is actually pretty funny. Polyphemus leaves to go and get Nutmeg to cook Clarice, whilst Grover tries to figure out who he captured. Once he figures out, he doesn't actually help, and Clarice has to cut herself free free and crashes onto the floor. You then get this silly pop-up and she compliments his dress. This next part is another great display of writing. You can clearly see the differing personalities on how both characters deal with the crisis. Grover's trying to get as much information as possible, whilst Clarice believes it's more prudent for them to escape and explain later. In fact, even though to her it probably seemed rude that Grover cared more about where Percy was than helping her out, she did give him answers in a genuinely empathetic way. She stops and apologizes for the fact that she thinks Percy and Annabeth are dead. You can see that she herself actually feels sad about that fact, and you wouldn't expect that from season 1 Clarice. Hell, you wouldn't expect that from episode 1 of season 2 Clarice. For someone who's so headstrong and was introduced as an arrogant bully targeting a new camper, she shows a lot of compassion here. As the scene continues, you can feel yourself siding with her. She was just captured by Polyphemus and he supposedly just run off to his pantry to grab some nutmeg before returning, so it seems like it should be top priority to get out of the cave. Meanwhile, here we have gentle Grover telling her that Percy isn't actually dead, and let's focus on hope instead. Bro, that's nice and hope is important, but getting out is a little bit more at the present, especially before she becomes demigod stew. Why not open with, hey, we have some rope, and here's an opening, so let's get you out here, instead of hope is a powerful construct. We cut back to Percy and Annabeth's spa day where they get dolled up, and good lord, this is better than anything I would have expected. From memory, I don't think Percy ever gets dressed up, does he? Doesn't Circe immediately turn him into a guinea pig? I love the traditional Greek vibes, the laurel in Percy's hair, the sandals, the dress, they both look so awesome. I also really enjoyed how Annabeth seems so uncomfortable. She would likely never have had any experience like this at all in her life. I mean, she's been largely living in an orange t-shirt for close to half of it. Then you have Percy, who's just being gracious to the lady fixing up his laurel. The comment about not telling anybody at camp about this was also really funny. They'd probably get torn to shreds by the kids. What do you mean you went on a quest and got to stay in a spa resort? Especially when they got to go on a quest just last year. Somebody's getting targeted in every camp game ever, I tell you what. So they moved into CC's office for evaluation. Annabeth pretty quickly catches on to the fact that this is Circe, and their demeanor immediately changes. Obviously there's some concern, but I kind of like the idea that Percy's the one who not necessarily trusts, but goes along with whatever their adversary says first. It echoes what happened with Medusa in season 1, plus it also plays into his fatal flaw, which we learn is loyalty. He doesn't want anything to hurt Annabeth, so he puts himself in harm's way to protect her. Again, just consistently great writing. He approaches the cursed mirror of Erised to see that time and time again, he will put his friends first and always try to save them. You also have Tyson's voice echoing in his head. I didn't really understand this at first. Is this guilt because he initially brushed Tyson off? Is it because Tyson inspired him with his own bravery and loyalty? And to me, I think it's both, and it seems as though that's why he gets so angry and upset. Even when confronted with something that could be dangerous, he's more upset about the fact that he didn't do more. It's great that they play into the guilt that he feels about Tyson's quote-unquote death. We know that losing Tyson had a big impact on Percy from the books, however in the books, he didn't really come to respect him until after it happened. In the show though, he becomes brothers with him. So logically, you would assume that he wouldn't feel much guilt about their relationship, but that's where we'd be wrong. It does make sense, especially because of his death, that Percy would feel extreme guilt over all the times he rejected him or resented his existence. He has come to love him like a brother, and now he's gone. His loyalty should have protected him, and maybe he feels like he wasn't loyal enough, and that's why Tyson died. To me, that's partially the reason why he questions Circe about this quality of his somehow being a flaw. Once he's confronted with the truth, he gets more and more angry and runs away. This part's so well acted by Walker in my opinion, the way he runs off all frantic and lost, and you can see the impact it has on him, and I think it carries the weight of what this means for the prophecy as well. The scene then somehow manages to ascend another tier when he tells Annabeth the truth, that he believes Circe's right and he cannot see how he'd sacrifice the people he cares about for the greater good. He spirals, telling her that he thinks that all the choices he makes could be wrong ones, but what he seems most worried about is that it could hurt the people he cares about. First of all, I'm loving the added nuance and emotional vulnerability of Percy and Annabeth this season. They've always played into that in the show, and it's great to see it continue. It also really helps that they use these scenes as doubles for exposition without it really feeling like that. You learn so much about fatal flaws and how it could foreshadow issues in the future for Percy and the people he cares about, whilst also having a moment of connection and growth for Percy and Annabeth's relationship. I have to mention that this was just another great Percybeth moment. When he said he'd burn down the entirety of Olympus for her, I mean, come on. Obviously there's romantic tones there, but I also think it's just very sweet on a friendship level. Here's this girl who lost her surrogate sister and she thinks it's her fault she died. Her brothers betrayed them all and is allied with the people willing to kill her. There's also clearly been issues with her human family that we haven't really gotten to yet, and she's feeling abandoned by her mother. This kid is largely alone, yet here's this boy she's known for what, a year? Willing to end Olympus, betray everything she's known, that hasn't treated her fairly as long as she's safe. It's this huge declaration of love and loyalty, and you can see how much it means to her even if they both know what a terrible decision that would be to make. There's so much emotional depth in this episode, but I do think this is the pinnacle. I very much enjoyed it. To cool off from that scene, we head back to Clarice and Grover, where they've set up a rope for her to climb and escape. This doesn't go very well, and Clarice falls from a great height, getting knocked unconscious. At that perfect moment, Polyphemus comes back and asks where she's gone, since Grover had quickly stashed her away. He lies and says she's escaped, while at the same time he's completely forgotten that his veil that was supposedly protecting his identity has been brushed off his face. Polyphemus tells him he's not a Cyclops and he's been tricked, only for Grover to desperately plead and somehow attempt to keep up this charade. This scene was pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie. When he keeps calling him Polly as as a pet name and then Polyphemus just incredulously shouting he's been tricked. It was so funny to me. Well, of course your dinner's got to try to come up with some plan of escape. They're not just going to walk inside your mouth willingly. Before we find out what happens next though, we head back to the CC's. Percy's staring at the statues of the six that got past the sirens, presumably looking for any type of clue that would be able to help them escape. He's approached by a servicewoman offering him a drink, and they strike up a conversation. Percy learns that she too is a demigod and arrived here herself while she was on a quest. She tells them how the others got past, and that fueled her belief that she could as well one day. We unfortunately also learn that she's also been there for over 50 years, and this scene just made me so sad. She seems so nice, and it's unfortunate that Percy and Annabeth have to leave them all to Circe. They'll be stuck there forever, and nothing's really going to be done about it. At least with the Lotus Casino, nobody's actually controlling it, but here, they've got an obvious adversary that's making it impossible for them to leave. Circe can do magic, and I'm sure she's likely to be powerful enough to beat the sirens, but she doesn't, and I'm not sure Percy and Annabeth are even going to think about these people again. Even though that left me feeling a little bit melancholy, the story won't let me dwell on it, and so Percy takes this information and confronts Circe with her schemes. Initially, the conversation goes pretty well. He tells her how he's heard about her story and how it must suck that everybody abandons her. Interestingly to me though, he trusts her fatal flaw, which I wasn't sure whether to believe. Earlier, when Percy takes a look in the mirror, she tells him that hers is empathy, and she always has to help people even if they hurt her. I'm not questioning the fatal flaw itself, but it sounds like something someone evil would say to make you feel sorry for them. There's that whole keeping prisoners shtick, and then this compounded on top of that does scream warning flags to me. Nevertheless, if it's true, which I now assume it is, I suppose it's part of her curse. Sure, she's no longer physically alone and she can soothe herself somewhat in that regard, but she must know it's not real. What she's looking for, a real connection, just doesn't exist here. Hell, even her trait that she obviously would view as a good thing in wanting to help others wouldn't be satisfying because she's not helping anyone. She's just comforting them and offering false hope, and in return is praised and well regarded by the community. I suppose she hasn't yet come to that realization, as at the end of the scene, she still says she has to help people. What she says rings true, that confronting your personal demons is far worse than any monster. So Percy plays his cards and he tells her that he's pretty much worked out her entire system, but he won't expose her as long as she helps Annabeth. Silly, silly boy. He's clearly aware of the story surrounding her. Even Annabeth explicitly accused Circe, who admitted it in front of him, 10 minutes ago? Once again, the human choices Annabeth keeps talking about screwed him over. I don't know why he didn't go to try to find Annabeth and tell her his plan. It feels like a very stupid mistake. Then again, he is also trying to sacrifice himself needlessly to get her off the island. If he thinks that she's got the wax that can help her escape, why not try to distract her and get the wax with Annabeth's invisibility cap or something? I don't know if she's got it here, but there's got to be 1,000,001 better plans than this. I would hedge my bets to say that the writers couldn't think of a better scenario to have Percy get transformed into a guinea pig, so they played into his flaws and rash thinking instead. Those are parts of his personality for sure, and he's certainly gung-ho when he wants to be, but I think this was a bit of a stretch even for Percy. So he gets got, and I do love this part. If you take a look at the subtitles, I'm pretty sure it says something along the lines of Percy pig shrieking, which definitely just added to the whole ridiculousness of the situation. I'm so very glad they kept this scene in. The writers are definitely getting a lot better at keeping the silly elements while striking that mature balance of emotional depth. Circe tells him that obviously she won't be keeping her end of the bargain, and here's your cage, have a nice life. We then get some more awesome callbacks to the books where Percy meets the pirate's Blackbeard and his crew. This has absolutely zero bearing on the overall story, but it doesn't even matter. It just brings the book to life and makes it all the more fun. We head back to the cave where Clarice wakes up and begins looking for Grover. He directs her to try to find a key to get him out of a wardrobe, and she tells him about the prophecy. Rewatching this scene, I thought it was very clever. Now that I've seen it, you obviously know it's going to be Polyphemus the whole time, but when you're watching, you have absolutely no idea, or at least I didn't. Maybe you're some genius, which, if you are, well done. However, on the second go around, there are some small tells that it isn't Grover. When Clarice mentioned an unnamed woman told her that this was the end for her, he asks if she means Annabeth. This makes sense in the context of Polyphemus's perspective because he would have heard the name from Grover's dreams, but he had no idea about the oracle. Grover, however, would be able to make the educated guess that this was the one who Clarice was referencing. Speaking of which, we get the last line of the prophecy that she'd fly to her final resting place, a tomb of stone. Now, we know that this isn't literal and the Clarice isn't dying, but Jesus Christ, if you heard that, you'd just shit yourself, wouldn't you? Without any other information, it would be impossible to interpret this any other way. It also is satisfying from a narrative perspective, as we've seen Clarice grow and become far more sympathetic across the season. You care about this girl and realize that she's just been misguided. You don't want her to die. If this was the same old Clarice that was angry, a bully, and just wanted glory, you might feel a twinge of sympathy that she'd be frightened of the possibility of her death, but you wouldn't care nearly as much. They really hone in on this when she says that she deserves her fate because she sacrificed her sailors, despite declaring loyalty to them. It says a lot about her character, and she's probably been my favourite across the entire season, tied with Tyson, of course. Hilariously, we get the reveal that not all is as it seems by Clarice pretty much calling bullshit on Grover's comforting words. He says her father's merciful and for her not to worry, and that alone immediately flags her suspicions so hard she breaks open the door. It's just too funny to me. There's multiple moments in this episode where you're lulled into this belief that maybe you don't know everything about the gods. After all, Grover was with Ares for a long time in season 1. Maybe he said something we didn't see, and therefore he knew something we didn't know. Sure, he said he didn't really like his own kids, but maybe there was something else, something more. Those thoughts were pretty much rushing through my head when I first watched the episode, but then we get the reveal that Grover's been tied up and Polyphemus was orchestrating that entire conversation conversation to sneak up and capture her. Poor Clarice, she just keeps getting knocked out again and again. This is what, her third time in the past couple of days? She needs a doctor, methinks. This reveal was so cool to me, and something I wasn't expecting at all. From memory, Polyphemus is pretty stupid in the books. Here though, he's clever and far more intimidating as a villain this way. I also really enjoyed that he's not monstrously huge. Some people might not like these changes, and I know there are book purists out there, but I'm not really one of them. I like faithful adaptations, but more to the heart of the story. Not every single word needs to be put to screen, and some changes like this are for the better. It's so sinister he's been luring all these demigods to his island so he can have his own private feast. How clever! It's also going to make beating him more difficult and actually worthy as a final boss for the end of the story instead of some side quest until we reunite with Luke. Furthermore, it really enforces the idea that Cyclops themselves aren't just stupid, and Tyson shouldn't be viewed as such. He's just young, and he's also the good version. Back to CC's, we see Annabeth enter Circe's office and tell her grand plan about sailing past the sirens. I take back whatever I said before about Percy telling Annabeth his grand plan because these two knuckleheads would just head straight into danger. I thought this girl was supposed to be wise. I guess her flaws are working in overdrive because it doesn't just seem like she wants to impress her mother, but also wants to impress Circe. At least that's what I'm getting. I mean, how impressed would she be that this 13-year-old figured out how everybody could leave? Then Circe could take her plan and be the true help to everybody else that Annabeth figures she wants to be. There's even some maternal play here. After all, here's this woman that took both her and Percy in and claims to want to help them both. She has them safe in this lovely resort and won't hurt them, at least that's what Annabeth thinks, so of course she wants to please her and be patted on the head and told what a good job she's done. It's far more than what her birth mother actually did, serving her up on a silver platter to echidna. I wonder if the writers planned for that or if it just worked out this way. Considering how emotionally in-depth each episode's been, I kind of think they did. Like I said, this episode's a gold mine and I'm loving every second of it. Annabeth then realizes Percy's been transformed into a guinea pig, and I love this moment. In the initial watch through, I just thought it was an accident that Percy got the water to move. I figured it was because he was anxious for Annabeth to figure it out and he was scared. However, now I think he did it deliberately. He purposely moves towards the water drip and then keeps intently looking at her. Couple that with her knowing how to get Circe off her case by delving into her personal burden so she feels useful and gets her to let her guard down. It's peak demigod cleverness. See, even though they were both headstrong and their flaws got in the way initially, they managed to get out of the situation by thinking on their feet. It shows what great heroes they really are and that their flaws aren't the be-all and end-all. Annabeth gets the vitamins to Percy and the pirates so they transform back into humans and they get to escape. Once again, the sheer delight I felt in getting to see Blackbeard and his crew was so good. I love that the writers didn't cut it. It was definitely something they could have done because, like I said, it wasn't needed, but they didn't, and it adds so much to the enjoyment and fleshing out of the world. 5 stars. Now, I know I was just praising their intelligence, but we can't expect these 13-year-olds to be consistent, right? They sail off without setting up any of the safeguards for the sirens, which are only meters away. I kept wondering why they would do this, and the only explanation I could think of is they were worried Circe would try to stop them. That could be true, but last they saw of her, she was being chased off by a band of pirates, so I think they could have had that time. They certainly could have put the wax in their ears and made their way down to the boat at least. Honestly, it would have taken some time for them to set up the boat in the first place. They could have just done part of it then and there. Especially since when we see them sailing, they're just sitting there. Come on, kids. Percy opens the wax and realizes it's mostly empty. He says there's only enough in there for one of them, but I strongly beg to differ. There's a whole coating around the edge of the jar that made them believe it was full. How long are these kids' ear canals? You definitely have room enough for 2. Besides, this wouldn't be a problem if they just tied themselves to the mast already in the first place like they'd already discussed. So Percy decides he'll be the one tied to the mast and Annabeth can have the wax. I still think that ensuring both of them being tied up would be the safer bet, but never mind. We can't have everything, can we? As Circe proves by summoning the jar back from them right as Annabeth was about to use it. Does she just have insanely good eyesight or something? How could she tell that Percy was tied up and that Annabeth was about to use it from that distance? I know they've got binoculars and telescopes up there on the viewing platform, but doesn't seem like she was using them. Also, no one's up there with her. Does nobody else know that Percy and Annabeth have left? What are they going to say when they inevitably notice they're gone? I suppose Circe could cast a spell on them maybe? Make them forget? She probably had to do it before if other guests have met the various demigods before they were turned into animals. Annabeth decides that she can face the sirens on her own, and Percy understandably freaks out at this. He probably should have thought of Riptide a bit quicker than he did, but I suppose it didn't matter because he got the job done in the end. I do wonder how he approached the sirens without falling for their song too. I know he says it's because they were focused on Annabeth, but that could have ended very, very badly. He did have the rope to pull both of them back, but if he was in a trance, he could have very easily cut himself free. Anyway, back to Annabeth. I love the vision and the fake out here. Initially, she sees Grover trying to keep the peace between Percy and Luke, and her friend, who she always views as the voice of reason and calm, calls on her to fix the entire feud and situation, which obviously they'd all agree on because she's so clever and perfect. But psych, she always knew they were sirens, and I wasn't expecting her to stab Percy and Luke, but that's an image I won't get out of my head anytime soon. I felt a bit jibbed that she went for Percy first, honestly. So she kills 2 of them and wakes up to the third one trying to get her, only for her own mother, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, to come flying in and save the day. What a cool entrance. She then tells Annabeth that she's awesome and she's always been watching her, which I remember thinking, yeah, like when you sentenced her to die. See, I fell once again for the second fake out. That's how you know the writing's good. They keep getting you. We see that Annabeth isn't some crazy genius that was able to beat the sirens through sheer willpower, and she too fell for them, but luckily, Percy comes and saves her ass. Once again, they're really hammering home that her mum was never there for her, and that the gods won't save their kids, but these kids are going to consistently put themselves in harm's way for each other to save them. They're the real family. We end the episode with an emotional catch-up scene where Annabeth pretty much lays it all out for Percy. Her guilt at what she did, thinking she could beat the sirens, and then they'd be able to end the war, and she'd be able to finally win her mother's affections. It's so sad as well, but of course, our emotional support demigod, Percy Jackson, knows exactly the right things to say. He says that she shouldn't just chalk up her behaviour to her fatal flaw, that it's called being human, and I do think that's fair. She may be prideful, but it doesn't mean it's something written in stone. She made a mistake, something they all do, and they can work through it together. He tells her that her mother should notice her. No ifs or buts. It doesn't matter that she made a mistake. It's something that she innately deserves. We also learn that Percy's desperation to save Annabeth pretty much shielded him from the sirens and allowed him to save her, which, if that isn't some of the most romantic shit you've heard, I don't know what is. The writers are cooking up a storm, I tell you what. They pretty much come to the agreement they saved each other, which I don't think is strictly true. I mean, Percy would have been fine tied to the mast, assuming he dropped Riptide so he couldn't cut himself free. Then again, Riptide always comes back to him in a roundabout way, so maybe they're right. It's certainly sweeter that way. As we finish, Percy notices they're at the correct coordinates, and we see they're heading straight for Polyphemus' island. Oh, what a cliffhanger. The preview shows us catching up with Tyson, more Chronos shenanigans, and Annabeth and Percy attempting to jailbreak Clarice and Grover, while simultaneously getting the fleece. Lots to come, that's for sure. This episode was genuinely such a standout. I think I'd say it's my favourite of the season so far, which is great, as I've pretty much been feeling that way with every episode we've been getting. I didn't mention it too much when talking about the plot, but it does need to be said that this episode was particularly stunning with the resort and the costumes. Plus the score was really great. I think the show is finally getting its sound down pat and it's edging its way into memorable soundtrack territory rather than just background music. You can see how much effort's going into these episodes from every single angle, and I'm enjoying it immensely. Can't wait for next week! Until then, all of these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.